Underestimated for her appearance, ignored for her profession, she accepted a challenge that would expose the dirty secrets of a millionaire empire, and what she did, no one would ever forget. The rumble of the engine was the lullaby that had rocked Casey Davis's dreams for as long as she could remember. In the outskirts of Springfield, Illinois, where dirt roads and makeshift repair shops formed the daily landscape, this curly-haired girl with hands always stained with grease grew up in a world few understood. The St. Anthony neighborhood, though far from downtown and lacking infrastructure, held treasures that only Casey's curious eyes could identify. Abandoned cars that told silent stories, discarded parts that held engineering secrets, and above all, her father's garage, Joe Davis's workshop. Joe's workshop, as it was known, occupied the lot next to the simple house where they lived. A building of exposed concrete blocks, zinc roof and an iron gate always ajar for those in need of mechanical rescue. There, between the smell of burnt oil and the constant sound of tools against metal, Casey found her refuge. By 7, she could distinguish a Phillips from a flathead screwdriver, and by 10 she could disassemble and reassemble a carburetor with precision many adults would never achieve. "Honey, pass me that 12 wrench, Joe would ask, while leaning over the engine of an '83 Chevy Nova, and before he even finished his sentence, Casey would already be extending the exact tool as if she could read her father's thoughts. Lucy observed this scene from the kitchen window, her brow furrowed and hands busy washing the lunch dishes. Her floral apron contrasted with the expression of concern she always wore whenever she saw her daughter in that environment she considered inappropriate. "Joseph, the girl needs to study. She can't spend all day in that garage. She'll end up just like us," she complained, trying to be heard above the noise of the sander. Lucy's words weren't driven by malice, but by the genuine fear she felt, imagining her daughter's future. In her view, shaped by years of financial difficulties and limited opportunities, the garage represented a path she didn't want for Casey. She dreamed of seeing her daughter educated, perhaps a doctor, far from Greece and the uncertainty of an income that depended on other people's broken cars. What Lucy couldn't see was that, for Casey, each engine part represented a universe of possibilities. While her classmates at the public school played with dolls or dreamed of princesses, she filled entire notebooks with detailed drawings of ignition systems, transmissions, and electrical diagrams that challenged even the science teacher's understanding. At Lincoln Elementary School, Casey was a walking contradiction, excellent in math and physics, but constantly called to the principal's office for reading mechanics magazines during English classes or for having fingernails permanently darkened by work in the garage. The principal, Mrs. Thompson, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, alternated between admiration for the girl's intelligence and concern about what she called inappropriate behavior for a young lady. "Casey, dear, you're so intelligent. Why don't you take an interest in more appropriate things?" Mrs. Thompson would question, without ever explaining what she considered appropriate. At 13 came the first major confrontation. During the science fair, while other students presented baking soda volcanoes or posters about the solar system, Casey brought a fully functional miniature VW bus engine that she had built with discarded parts from her father's garage. Her presentation attracted students, teachers, and even parents from other classes, forming a circle around her table. "See, when we connect these wires and press this button," she explained, her face lit with enthusiasm as the small engine came to life before the wide-eyed audience. She was interrupted by Mr. Roberts, the science teacher, who crossed his arms and asked with a condescending smile, "And who helped you make this, Casey? Was it your dad?" The question, loaded with assumptions, caused the animated buzz around her to cease. Casey felt her stomach sink as she saw in the teacher's eyes something she had witnessed many times before, the certainty that a 13-year-old girl would be incapable of understanding, much less building, something so complex. "No, Mr. Roberts, my dad only lent me the tools. I studied from library books and did everything myself," she answered, with the firmest voice she could muster. The silence that followed was broken by muffled laughter from some classmates. Mr. Roberts adjusted his glasses, visibly uncomfortable with the direct response. "Well, let's see then. Explain to us how the cooling system works in this toy of yours." It wasn't a toy, and Casey knew it. It was the result of months of study, trial and error, nights awake under the dim light of the lamp while everyone slept. It was her passion materialized, and in the next 15 minutes, she explained not just the cooling system, but every component of that engine, with the precision of someone who mastered the subject better than most adults in the room could. At the end of her explanation, the silence was different. The mocking smiles had disappeared, replaced by expressions of astonishment and, in some cases, reluctant respect. Mr. Roberts, without admitting defeat, merely said that she had a knack for mechanics, as if noting that a bird knew how to fly. That night, back home, Casey found her father sitting on the porch smoking a cigarette and contemplating the starry Illinois sky. Without needing words, she sat beside him on the cement step. "How was it at school?" asked Joe with that hoarse voice that carried the weight of years of hard work. "It was different," she replied, resting her chin on her hands. "They didn't believe I made the engine myself." Joe put out his cigarette and let out a long sigh before putting his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "My girl, there are things you don't need to prove to anyone. What matters is what you know, what you do. One day they'll see." Her father's simple words carried a wisdom she would carry forever. That night, under the Springfield sky, between the smell of motor oil and damp earth, Casey began to understand that her path would be different, perhaps harder, but undeniably her own. The high school years brought new challenges for Casey. Jefferson High School in central Springfield was known for its academic rigor and tradition. There, uniforms had to be impeccable, girls were required to wear their hair tied back, and expectations about feminine behavior were even stricter than at the elementary school. Casey, now 15, faced the daily dilemma of balancing who she really was with what they expected her to be. The grease stains that previously bothered only Lucy and the principal at her old school were now the subject of constant comments. "Looks like you work in a coal mine, girl," Ms. Parker, the English teacher, would say when returning essays. Classmates subtly distanced themselves during group work, as if a passion for mechanics were a contagious disease, something that could stain not just hands, but reputations. At home, the pressure also increased. Lucy, inspired by neighbors' comments about how her daughter was wasting her potential playing mechanic, intensified her attempts to keep Casey away from the garage. "Sweetheart, have you thought about taking a nursing course? Mrs. Williams's niece got a job at the hospital as soon as she finished," she would suggest, while setting dinner on the table. "Or teaching. You've always been good with numbers. You could teach." Joe, who had previously openly encouraged his daughter's interest, began to show concern, not about her talent, which only grew with time, but about the doors the world seemed determined to close to Casey simply because she was a woman. "Casey," he said one night as they worked together on fixing a square-bodied Ford F-150, "you know I'm proud of your way with machines, but this world is hard on those who are different. I don't want to see you suffering." Those words, coming from her greatest ally, hit Casey harder than any malicious comment from classmates or teachers. For the first time, she felt truly alone in her passion. But instead of discouraging her, that moment ignited something new in her chest: determination. The next day, during physics class, Mr. Wilson presented a challenge to the class. Create a project demonstrating thermodynamic principles for the regional science fair. While groups naturally formed among friends, Casey remained alone, her notebook already full of sketches for a simplified internal combustion engine model. "Are you going to work alone again, Davis?" asked the teacher, adjusting his thick-framed glasses. "Yes, Mr. Wilson. I already have an idea." Wilson approached and examined the drawings in Casey's notebook. His eyebrows rose in surprise, and, for a moment, she thought she had finally found someone who would recognize her potential. However, what came next was a condescending smile. "This is very ambitious for the high school level, Davis. Why not do something simpler, like everyone else? A volcano, perhaps, or a panel on solar energy?" The suggestion, seemingly harmless, carried the same message Casey constantly heard. Limit yourself, dream less, don't stand out. But something had changed within her. Her father's concerned words, instead of sowing doubt, had strengthened her resolve. "With all due respect, Mr. Wilson, I know I can do this, and I'll prove it." In the following weeks, Casey divided her time between school, helping at the garage, and working on her project. She transformed a corner of her room into a small workbench, with tools borrowed from her father and materials she got from scrapyards and donations. She slept only 4 or 5 hours a night, but fatigue was overcome by the excitement of seeing her project take shape. The night before the fair, while making final adjustments, she overheard an argument between her parents in the kitchen. "Joseph, do you see what this girl is doing? She doesn't leave that room, doesn't talk to anyone her age, doesn't dress like a young lady. People are talking, Joseph." "Since when do we care what others say, Lucy? The girl has talent, you know that." "Talent for what? To live like us, counting pennies at the end of the month? I want more for her, Joseph." The silence that followed weighed on Casey like a slab. That night, as she put the last screws in her model, she made a silent promise. She would prove her worth, not just to herself, but to everyone who doubted. The regional science fair occupied the school gym, transformed into a maze of tables, with projects ranging from posters about global warming to models of the solar system. Casey's project, however, stood out for its complexity and technical precision. A scaled-down combustion engine, fully functional, built with recycled parts and capable of demonstrating thermodynamic principles in real time, with improvised but surprisingly accurate temperature and pressure gauges. When Mr. Wilson approached, accompanied by the fair judges, Casey felt her heart race. Among the evaluators was Dr. Henry Matthews, a professor from the Mechanical Engineering Department at the University of Illinois, known for his rigor and traditional stance. "This is Casey Davis," introduced Mr. Wilson, with a tone that mixed reluctant pride and apprehension. "She built this engine model." Dr. Matthews adjusted his glasses and examined the project with clinical interest. His face, marked by years in academia, revealed no emotion as he listened to the detailed explanation Casey offered about each component and physical principle applied. "Did you build this yourself?" he finally asked, with a deep voice that intimidated freshmen at the university. "Yes, sir, I designed and built every part." "And where did you learn about forced circulation cooling systems?" "That's not part of the high school curriculum. My dad's a mechanic. I grew up in a garage, and I also read a lot, sir. The public library has a small but useful engineering section." The university professor asked a few more technical questions, increasingly specific, as if trying to find the limit of this young woman's knowledge. Casey, however, answered with the confidence of someone who not only memorized concepts but understood them deeply. "Impressive," muttered Dr. Matthews, finally allowing a discreet smile to break his serious demeanor. Turning to Mr. Wilson, he added, "This young woman has a future in engineering. You should encourage her." Those words, coming from an academic authority, fell like lightning in the gymnasium. Mr. Wilson, visibly uncomfortable, merely nodded in agreement. The other students, who had previously ignored Casey's project, now crowded around to see what had caught the dreaded Dr. Matthews' attention. At the end of the day, when the awards were announced, Casey won not only first place in the applied physics category, but also the grand prize of the fair. The trophy, an acrylic piece shaped like a lamp, seemed small compared to the real achievement of that day: recognition. Back home, she found her parents waiting in the living room, Lucy's face marked by anxiety, Joe's by contained hope. "Well?" asked her father, trying to disguise the expectation in his voice. Casey placed the trophy on the coffee table, next to the bills to be paid and a local newspaper open to the job listings page. "First place," she said simply, "and the professor from the University of Illinois said I have a future in engineering." The hug she received from her father was strong enough to take her breath away, but it was Lucy's reaction that really surprised her. Instead of the usual concerns, she saw something new in her mother's eyes, a mixture of pride and belated understanding. "Engineer," murmured Lucy, as if tasting the word for the first time. "My daughter, an engineer." That night, as the family celebrated with an improvised cake, Casey made a decision that would change the course of her life. She would apply to study mechanical engineering at the University of Illinois. It wouldn't be easy, she knew that. She would have to study much harder than classmates from private schools. But now she had something that had been missing until then, the certainty that her dream, however difficult it seemed, was possible. The day of registration for the University of Illinois entrance exam dawned with a fine rain, the kind that seems more mist than water. Casey woke up before the alarm, her stomach knotted by a mixture of anxiety and determination. At 17, she carried on her shoulders not just her own dreams, but also the expectations that had begun to form around her since the victory at the science fair. "Are you sure you don't want me to go with you, honey?" asked Joe, pouring himself coffee in the kitchen, while Casey finished organizing the documents needed for registration. "No need, Dad. It's just filling out a form and paying the fee." What Casey didn't say was that she preferred to face that moment alone. In recent months, she had studied with an intensity that worried even her parents. Books borrowed from the library, second-hand study guides bought at the downtown bookstore, sleepless nights solving physics and math problems. Every free minute was dedicated to preparation. Every penny saved went to the fund she mentally called My Future. On the university campus, a complex of modern buildings that contrasted with the simplicity of the neighborhood where she lived, Casey felt momentarily out of place. Students moved with the confidence of those who belonged in that space, talking about research and assignments with a naturalness she didn't yet possess. Taking a deep breath, she followed the signs to the registration sector. "Full name?" asked the clerk, a middle-aged woman with glasses hanging on a colorful cord. "Casey Davis." Date of birth: August 15, 2000. Intended major: mechanical engineering. The clerk paused her typing and looked at Casey over her glasses as if she had heard something strange. "Mechanical engineering? Are you sure, dear? It's a very demanding course, you know. Most girls prefer civil or environmental engineering." The suggestion didn't surprise Casey. It was just another voice in the chorus that constantly tried to redirect her to more suitable paths. But the time for hesitation was behind her. "I'm sure, ma'am. Mechanical engineering." The clerk shrugged and continued filling out the electronic form. When she finished, she handed Casey a registration receipt and the guide for payment of the fee. "You have until tomorrow to pay. After that, the registration is automatically cancelled." Casey thanked her and put the papers in her worn backpack. She was about to leave when the clerk called her again. "Wait a moment. I think I typed your name wrong." Casey's heart raced. Any bureaucratic error could compromise her chance to take the exam. "Let me check. Ah, yes, I typed Case instead of Casey. These things happen when the course doesn't match the name, don't they?" The joke was accompanied by a laugh that Casey didn't return. In silence, she waited for the correction to be made, thanked again with the firmest voice she could muster, and went out into the damp morning air. At the bank, the registration fee represented almost all the money she had saved, working as an assistant in her father's garage. As she handed the amount to the teller, she felt a mixture of fear and hope. There was no guarantee of approval, and that money could have been used for so many other things. A more accessible technical course, new tools, even help with the household bills, which had been tight since Joe had begun to have health problems. The following months were of intense preparation. Casey created an almost military routine. She woke up at 5 in the morning to study before helping in the garage, took advantage of every break at school to solve questions from previous entrance exams, and at night, after everyone was asleep, she continued until her eyes could no longer focus on the words in the books. Joe's health, meanwhile, became a growing concern. What had started as a persistent cough evolved into shortness of breath crises that forced him to interrupt work frequently. The doctors at the health clinic spoke of occupational disease, the result of years of breathing engine smoke and chemicals without adequate protection. "Don't worry about me, honey," he would say between coughing fits. "It's just fatigue. Focus on your studies." But how could she not worry? The garage, which previously operated at a constant pace, now faced days when the doors remained closed because Joe was not able to work. Lucy, who had never needed to work outside the home, started doing house cleaning in the upscale neighborhood to compensate for the reduced income. In this scenario of uncertainties, the day of the entrance exam arrived. Casey woke up with her body aching from having slept only 3 hours after a night helping her father with a particularly severe respiratory crisis. She looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror and saw the deep, dark circles that marked her young face. "You can do this," she said to her reflection, repeating the words that her father had so often said. The University of Illinois entrance exam was known for its difficulty. Divided into 2 days with objective and essay questions, it tested not just knowledge, but mental endurance. On the first day, Casey faced mathematics, physics, and chemistry, her strongest subjects. On the second day, essays and the remaining subjects. When she finished, she felt as if she had run a marathon. "How was it?" asked Lucy when Casey finally returned home on Sunday afternoon. "I think I did well," she replied cautiously. In fact, she was sure she had done better than well, but years of frustrated expectations had taught her to moderate her optimism. The results would be announced only a month later. During this period, Joe's health continued to decline, and the family's routine reorganized around the patriarch's needs. Casey took on more responsibilities in the garage, serving long-time customers and making small repairs, while her father supervised from an improvised chair near the tool bench. On a particularly busy afternoon, while working on the brake system of a Ford Fiesta, Casey was interrupted by a shout from Lucy coming from the house. "Casey! Casey! The results are out!" Her heart raced in her chest as she ran inside, her hands still dirty with grease. Joe was already in the living room, sitting in the worn armchair, the family's old laptop open on the coffee table. "Honey, look here," he pointed, his voice choked with contained emotion. On the screen, the list of those approved for mechanical engineering. And there, among the 50 names that had won a place, was hers, Casey Davis, 32nd place. The collective hug that followed was the most intense moment of celebration that house had witnessed in years. Silent tears ran down Joe's marked face while Lucy repeated, "My daughter is going to be an engineer," like a mantra of pride and amazement. Enrollment at the university brought new financial challenges. Although tuition was free for those who qualified for financial aid, there were books, materials, transportation. The family gathered in council to discuss how to make the dream that was now beginning to take shape viable. "We can sell the Nova," Joe suggested, referring to the old car he used for garage emergencies. "No way," Casey countered. "I'll study and work. I've already talked to Tim at the auto electric shop. He said I can help on my free afternoons." The solution came in the form of a maintenance assistance scholarship intended for low-income students. It wasn't much, but it would cover transportation and part of the materials. For the rest, Casey would keep the part-time job in her father's garage, with occasional help at Tim's Auto Electric when possible. The first day of classes at the School of Mechanical Engineering was like entering a parallel world. The imposing building, with equipped laboratories and spacious rooms, seemed to come from another universe when compared to the reality of the St. Anthony neighborhood. Casey, dressed in the best clothes she owned, jeans without signs of wear and a basic white t-shirt, still felt out of place among colleagues who sported the latest laptops and brand-name backpacks that she only knew from advertisements. In the front row of the classroom, where she chose to sit so as not to miss any detail, she was one of only 3 women in a class of 50 students, and among the 3, the only one who visibly didn't belong to the upper middle class of the city. "Welcome to Mechanical Engineering," announced Professor Richard Thompson, the course coordinator, a middle-aged man with an austere air. "Look at the colleague next to you. Statistically, only one of you two will be here at the end of the semester." The phrase, intended to intimidate freshmen and establish the tone of difficulty of the course, caused nervous laughter throughout the room. The young man seated next to Casey, a privileged-looking youth named Philip, looked at her with a barely disguised smile of superiority. "I think we know who won't be here, don't we?" he murmured, loud enough for others around to hear and laugh. Casey kept her eyes fixed on the professor, absorbing every word of the introductory class. That comment was just the first of many she would face. She knew that. But unlike high school, now she had an unshakable certainty. She belonged in that place as much as anyone. The first semester at the university proved more challenging than Casey had imagined. It wasn't just the complex subjects like advanced calculus, theoretical physics, and technical drawing that consumed her energies, but the constant battle to prove her worth in an environment that seemed determined to exclude her. In practical laboratory classes, she was systematically the last to be chosen to form groups, and when she finally integrated into one, her suggestions were often ignored or attributed to other members. During a demonstration of material resistance, when she pointed out an error in the experiment setup that could compromise the results, Professor Edward looked at her with skepticism. "Are you sure, Miss Davis? This procedure is standard." "I am, Professor. The extensometer calibration is incorrect for the type of alloy we're testing." The silence that followed was broken by muffled giggles. The professor, visibly annoyed at being corrected by a freshman and a woman, decided to proceed with the original experiment. 15 minutes later, when the results proved inconsistent for exactly the reason Casey had pointed out, there was no acknowledgement of her correctness, just a mutter about unforeseen variables. At home, the situation was also getting complicated. Joe's health was gradually deteriorating, forcing him to further reduce his working hours at the garage. Casey divided herself between university classes, night studies, work at Tim's Auto Electric, and caring for her father, whose labored breathing became more evident with each day. "You're killing yourself this way, my daughter," commented Lucy one night, finding Casey asleep over her books at the small kitchen table. "You can't continue like this." "I'm fine, Mum. I just need to organize myself better." But the truth was that Casey was constantly operating at the limit of her strength. The sleepless nights reflected in deep, dark circles, and her thin body seemed increasingly fragile under the weight of accumulated responsibilities. Even so, she maintained exemplary grades, often the highest in the class, a fact her colleagues attributed to luck or an alleged preference from professors. It was during the second semester that an unexpected event changed the dynamics of the course. The university received a significant donation from an automotive industry to develop a prototype of a more efficient and less polluting engine. The project would be conducted by students under faculty supervision, and participants would receive research scholarships. For Casey, this was the perfect opportunity. Working with what she loved and still receiving financial aid that would relieve pressure on the family, she immediately signed up, submitting a detailed essay about her ideas for the project. On the eve of the announcement of those selected, she found Professor Marcus, responsible for the selection, talking with Philip, the same classmate who had made the unpleasant comment on the first day of class, and who since then had become a kind of informal leader among the more privileged students. "Professor, excuse me for interrupting," said Casey. "I just wanted to confirm if my application for the engine project was received." Marcus looked at her with an expression that mixed surprise and annoyance. "Ah, yes, Davis, we received it, but I need to warn you that the project requires advanced knowledge and practical experience that second-semester students rarely possess." "I understand, sir, but I grew up in a mechanic's garage. I've had practical experience with engines since I was 10. Philip laughed openly. "Changing oil and tightening screws isn't practical experience, Davis. We're talking about cutting-edge engineering." "Actually," Casey kept her voice firm, despite the anger she felt growing, "I've already rebuilt entire engines, developed adaptations for ignition systems in older vehicles, and implemented solutions for reducing consumption in more than 15 different cars. I can provide a list with names and contacts of clients if necessary." Professor Marcus cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the confrontation. "Well, the selection will be based on the technical merit of the proposals. We'll announce tomorrow." The next day, the faculty's electronic bulletin board displayed the list of the 10 selected for the project. Casey anxiously searched for her name, scrolling through the list once, twice, 3 times. It wasn't there. In its place were students with grades much lower than hers, including 2 who rarely appeared in practical classes. The disappointment was like a punch in the stomach. For the first time since entering the university, Casey allowed herself to cry, hidden in the women's bathroom of the engineering block. It wasn't just for the lost scholarship, but for the flagrant injustice, the confirmation that no matter how hard she tried, certain doors would remain closed simply because of who she was. Wiping away her tears, she decided she deserved an explanation. She headed to Professor Marcus's office and knocked on the door with more force than she intended. "Davis, what can I do for you?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the computer screen. "I'd like to understand why I wasn't selected for the project, Professor. My grades are the highest in the class. I have proven practical experience, and my proposal met all the requirements." Marcus finally looked at her with an expression of boredom. "The positions were limited, Davis. We had to make difficult choices." "Based on what exactly?" "Because I see students who barely attend the lab on the list, while I was rejected without technical justification." The professor removed his glasses and massaged the bridge of his nose, a gesture that Casey already recognized as a sign of impatience. "Look, Davis, I'll be frank. This project involves cooperation with industry, meetings with executives, presentations to investors. We need people who fit into that environment." "People who fit," repeated Casey, letting the words hang in the air with all their implicit weight. "I understand perfectly, Professor." She left the room with her back straight and chin raised, but inside something had broken. For the first time, she seriously considered the possibility of giving up. Maybe her mother had been right from the beginning. Maybe that world wasn't for her. That night, arriving home, she found Joe sitting on the porch, his gaze lost on the horizon where the sun was setting over the simple roofs of the St. Anthony neighborhood. Without saying a word, she sat beside him on the cement step. "Bad day?" he asked, always perceptive about his daughter's moods. "The worst," replied Casey, and then told him about the project, the unjustified rejection, the professor's veiled words. Joe listened in silence, lighting a cigarette that his health no longer allowed, but which occasionally still represented his small act of rebellion against the limitations of his body. When Casey finished her account, he exhaled a long puff before speaking. "You know, honey, when I started as a mechanic, nobody wanted to give me work. I was too young, inexperienced, a farmer's son. Customers looked for Thomas, for Mike, anyone but me." He paused to contain a coughing fit, the result of the cigarette in lungs already compromised. "One day, a gentleman came in with a 75-old's Cutlass that nobody could get to start. He had already been to all the garages in town. Thomas, full of himself, said the engine was condemned, that everything needed to be replaced. It would cost a fortune." Joe smiled at the memory, the wrinkles around his eyes accentuating. "When everyone left, I asked the owner to take a look. I spent the whole night disassembling that engine piece by piece. I discovered a tiny crack in the block, almost impossible to see. I welded, adjusted, tested until I couldn't anymore. The next morning, when Thomas arrived, the Cutlass was roaring like new." Casey listened attentively, beginning to understand where her father was going. "The owner was so impressed that he spread the story all over town. In a month, I had more work than I could handle. Thomas, poor guy, never understood how a no-name kid managed to steal half his customers." Putting out the cigarette carefully, Joe turned to face his daughter. "What I'm saying, Casey, is that there are two paths when doors close. Give up or create your own door. That professor and those colleagues don't define who you are or what you're capable of. Your competence will speak louder than any prejudice, but only if you persist." The simple but profound words resonated with Casey like a call. That very night, while everyone slept, she began to sketch what would be her own independent project, a diagnostic software for electronic engines, something that combined her practical garage knowledge with the advanced theories she was learning at the university. In the following weeks, she invested every free minute in this project. With a second-hand laptop she had bought in installments, she programmed until late hours, tested algorithms, created intuitive interfaces. When she wasn't programming, she was in the garage, collecting real data from vehicles with various problems to feed her database. The software, which she simply named Diagnose, was capable of interpreting readings from vehicle sensors and comparing them with patterns of known failures, suggesting possible causes and solutions. More than that, it learned from each new case, refining its diagnostics over time. At the end of the semester, while the official engine project presented its preliminary results at a closed event for professors and industry partners, Casey silently launched her software in the online community of independent mechanics. Without fanfare, without academic recognition, just a practical tool for real people who fixed real cars. The response was immediate and surprising. Mechanics from all over the country began to download and test Diagnose, reporting impressive results. Vehicles that had challenged traditional diagnostics had their problems identified in minutes. The simple interface made the tool accessible even for professionals with little familiarity with technology. In less than a month, Diagnose had been downloaded more than 5,000 times and was receiving enthusiastic reviews in specialized forums. Some users even offered to pay for advanced or customized versions, something Casey hadn't even considered initially. It was Tim from Auto Electric who first recognized the commercial potential of Casey's creation. "Girl, do you realize what you've created? This is gold. You should patent it before someone steals your idea." The suggestion opened a new horizon of possibilities. With the help of a law professor from the university, a friend of Tim's, Casey began the process of registering the intellectual property of the software. It was an expensive and bureaucratic process, but the growing community of Diagnose users organized an online fundraiser that covered all costs. At the beginning of the third semester, while the official engine project faced delays and technical difficulties, Casey's diagnose gained its first report in a specialized magazine in the automotive sector. The article, titled "The Silent Revolution in American Garages," described how an engineering student from Springfield was transforming the way small workshops diagnosed complex problems. When the magazine hit the stands, with a photo of Casey alongside her father at Davis's garage, the environment at the university subtly changed. Professors who had barely noticed her presence before now greeted her in the corridors. Colleagues who had excluded her from study groups suddenly showed interest in exchanging ideas. Professor Marcus himself, when crossing paths with her in the library, made a point of commenting that he had heard about her software. The years at the university passed faster than Casey could have imagined. Between studies, work at the garage, continuous development of diagnose, and care for Joe's increasingly fragile health, the days merged into an exhausting routine, but one filled with small achievements. The software, now in its 5th version, had become a stable source of income, allowing Casey to reduce her hours at Auto Electric to focus on studies and family. Graduation came without major celebrations. The ceremony, held in the university's main auditorium, featured the proud presence of Lucy and Joe, the latter in a wheelchair that had become necessary in recent months due to the progression of his lung disease. When the name Casey Davis was called to receive the mechanical engineering diploma, the discreet applause from her family contrasted with the ovation that students from influential families received. But for Casey, those few sincere claps meant more than any formal recognition. "I'm proud of you, honey," Joe whispered when she approached after the ceremony, diploma in hand. "I always knew you'd get here." The decision about what to do after graduation had been made months before. Unlike most colleagues who competed for positions in multinational companies or large automakers, Casey had other plans. With savings from diagnose sales and a small loan from the People's Bank, she renovated the shed attached to her parents' house, expanding the space of her father's old garage and modernizing the equipment. Davis Garage, as the business was now formally called, opened its doors officially 1 week after graduation. The space, though still modest compared to large dealerships, now had a hydraulic lift, a computerized diagnostic system, based of course on the software Casey had developed, and specialized tools that allowed service for everything from popular Fords and Chevys to more sophisticated vehicles. The first customers were the same as always: neighbors, acquaintances, ride-share drivers from the neighborhood. But gradually, driven by the reputation of diagnose and word of mouth about the engineer who really understood cars, the clientele began to diversify. Professionals from downtown, small business owners, even some university professors started bringing their vehicles to the garage in the outskirts of Springfield. One Saturday afternoon, almost 6 months after the inauguration of the renovated garage, Casey was finishing the repair of an air conditioning system when an unusual vehicle parked in front. A van equipped for refrigerated cargo transport, with the logo of a small dairy company from the region. From the vehicle descended a middle-aged man, worried expression and calloused hands that betrayed years of hard work. He introduced himself as John, owner of Serrano Dairy, a family business that distributed products to local markets. "My daughter told me about you," he explained as he accompanied Casey to the van. "Said you fix what nobody else can." The problem was serious. The van's refrigeration system showed intermittent failures, compromising the quality of the transported products. It had already passed through 4 different garages, including the brand's dealership, and no one had managed to definitively solve the problem. "It's our only delivery vehicle," explained John, the concern evident in his voice. "If it doesn't work properly, we lose the merchandise and the customers. It's my entire family's livelihood." Casey examined the vehicle with meticulous attention. She connected her laptop to the system, ran preliminary diagnostics, checked physical components. Instead of rushing to give a verdict, she asked permission to keep the vehicle for 24 hours for a complete analysis. "I can't promise I'll solve it, but I promise I'll try all possibilities," she said honestly. When John left, Casey completely immersed herself in the challenge. She spent the entire night in the garage, disassembling parts of the system, analyzing data, testing theories. In the early morning, while the city slept, she had a suspicion. What if the problem wasn't in the refrigeration system itself, but in the interaction between it and the vehicle's main electrical system? After a few more hours of testing, she confirmed her theory. The problem was a subtle incompatibility between the original electronic control unit and a temperature control module that had been installed later. Under certain conditions of external temperature and engine speed, the system entered into conflict, resulting in failures that no one could explain. When John returned the following afternoon, Casey explained in detail what she had found and how she planned to solve it. The solution involved not only adjustments to existing components, but also the installation of a small intermediary device that she had designed during the night, capable of harmonizing the communication between the conflicting systems. "How much will this cost me?" asked John, already preparing to hear a value beyond his possibilities. The price Casey proposed was significantly lower than what the other garages had charged just for inconclusive diagnoses. John, initially suspicious of such an advantageous proposal, agreed with one condition: he would only pay if the problem was really solved. 3 days later, the Serrano dairy van was back on the roads, its refrigeration system working perfectly even in the most extreme conditions. John, keeping his word, paid the agreed amount and added a bonus in the form of products from his small factory. "You saved my business," he said, shaking Casey's hand firmly. "You can be sure I'll tell everyone." And he did. In the following weeks, other small business owners with adapted vehicles began to seek out Davis Garage. Delivery trucks, school vans, vehicles modified for people with disabilities. Cases that other garages considered too complicated or not profitable enough began to form the core of Casey's clientele. The reputation of the mechanic who solved the impossible surpassed the limits of Springfield. An article in the regional newspaper highlighted how small entrepreneurs were finding accessible solutions for complex mechanical problems thanks to the innovative work of Davis Garage. The fact that it was a young woman commanding the business in a traditionally male sector gave an additional angle to the story, although Casey always emphasized that what mattered was the quality of the service, not the gender of who performed it. On a March afternoon, almost 2 years after graduation, a vehicle that completely stood out from the garage's standard parked in front. A red Ferrari 488 GTB, gleaming under the strong Illinois sun, silenced its powerful engine before the surprised eyes of Casey and the 2 assistants who now integrated her team. From the sports car descended a man of approximately 50 years, wearing casual but visibly expensive clothes. He introduced himself as Richard Baker, a businessman from Chicago and owner of Premium Motors, one of the most prestigious luxury vehicle dealerships in the state of Illinois. "Miss Davis," he greeted, extending his hand with a smile that mixed cordiality and a hint of condescension. "I've heard a lot about you. I hope you don't mind my visit without prior notice." Casey returned the greeting with professional firmness, intrigued by the presence of this man and his $500,000 car in her modest garage in the outskirts. "How can I help you, Mr. Baker?" The businessman gestured toward the sports car. "I have a problem with this beauty that's driving me crazy. It started about 2 months ago. Intermittent failures, especially at high speed. It's already gone through complete revision at the official dealership twice. They changed sensors, reprogrammed the central unit, even replaced components of the injection system. Nothing solved it." Casey maintained a neutral expression, although internally she felt a mixture of excitement for the technical challenge and suspicion about the real intentions of this visit. It was hard to believe that a businessman of Baker's caliber would travel to Springfield to look for a neighborhood garage, however good its regional reputation might be. "How did you hear about me?" she asked directly. Baker smiled, seeming to appreciate the frankness. "A client of mine, owner of a transportation company, had a similar problem in a delivery van. After spending a fortune in Chicago without results, he decided to bring the vehicle to you during a business trip. He returned impressed, saying that a young mechanic from Springfield solved in 2 days what specialists couldn't in months." The explanation made sense, but didn't completely eliminate the feeling that there was something more to this visit. "I understand, but Premium Motors specializes in luxury vehicles. Surely you have access to technicians more qualified than me to deal with a Ferrari." "Theoretically, yes," replied Baker, now with a more serious tone. "In practice, we're facing a problem that no one can solve. And in my experience, when conventional specialists fail, we need someone with a different approach, innovative." He paused before continuing. "Besides, I'm a businessman. I like to personally verify when I hear about someone exceptional. I confess I was skeptical when they told me about you, Not because you're a woman, but because of your age, and because you work far from major centers. But after investigating a bit, I discovered your diagnostic software, your training, the cases you've solved. I was intrigued. The businessman's honesty, though mixed with traces of prejudice, was refreshing. Casey decided that, at the very least, the technical challenge was worthwhile. I can take a look, but I can't promise results. Ferraris aren't exactly common around here. That's all I ask. A chance. Casey asked for the keys and the technical documentation of the vehicle. While Baker watched her with curiosity, she connected her diagnostic system to the electronic control unit of the sports car and began to analyze the data that appeared on the computer screen. "Do you mind if I ask some questions about the vehicle's history?" she asked without taking her eyes off the screen. "Absolutely not. Ask whatever you need." "When did you acquire the car?" "About a year ago. Direct import." "Has it undergone any modifications after purchase? Any alteration, however minor?" Baker thought for a moment. "Just aesthetic personalization, interior details, sound system, nothing in the engine or electronic part." Casey nodded, absorbing the information while continuing to examine the data. "And when exactly did the problems begin?" "After a routine service about 2 months ago. At first they were almost imperceptible, a slight hesitation when accelerating. Then they gradually worsened." That detail caught Casey's attention. Coincidences existed, but in her experience, problems that arose right after interventions were rarely coincidences. "Who did this service?" "The Premium Motors team. We have factory-certified technicians." Casey continued the questioning for a few more minutes, extracting information that might seem irrelevant to laypeople, but which for her formed pieces of a technical puzzle. After concluding this preliminary stage, she asked for authorization for a more detailed physical inspection. "It will take a few hours. You can leave the car and come back later, or wait if you prefer." Baker checked his watch and decided to wait. While Casey worked, he observed with growing interest her systematic methodology, so different from the hurried approach he saw in many luxury garages, where concern with image often surpassed commitment to technical excellence. 2 hours later, Casey emerged from under the hood with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction and a hint of indignation. "I found your problem, Mr. Baker, and it's not mechanical, it's ethical." Richard Baker faced Casey with an expression that mixed confusion and alertness. "What do you mean ethical? What does that mean?" Casey cleaned her hands on a cloth before answering, mentally organizing the evidence she had collected in the last few hours. "Mr. Baker, your car was sabotaged, in a subtle but deliberate way." The businessman visibly paled. "Sabotaged? By whom? How?" Casey led him to the open hood of the Ferrari, pointing to specific components while explaining. "During the last service, someone installed a counterfeit sensor in the electronic injection system. It looks identical to the original externally, but internally it's programmed to send incorrect readings intermittently, especially when the engine reaches higher temperatures at high speed." She continued, showing other details that corroborated her conclusion. "In addition, I found evidence of manipulation in the parameters of the electronic control unit, small adjustments that individually would go unnoticed, but that together create an apparently unsolvable problem. It's sophisticated work, carried out by someone with advanced technical knowledge and privileged access to the vehicle." Baker ran his hand through his graying hair, his expression transitioning between disbelief and contained fury. "Are you telling me that someone from my own team sabotaged my car? Why?" "That I can't say. What I can state with certainty is that it wasn't an error or a defective part. It was an intentional action designed to cause persistent problems without leaving obvious evidence. If you'll allow me to be frank, it seems that someone wanted to ensure your car would continue returning for frequent and expensive maintenance." The businessman remained silent for a few moments, processing the implications of those revelations. When he finally spoke, his voice had a different tone, more respectful. "Can you fix it?" "I've already identified all the tampered components. I can replace them with genuine parts and reprogram the electronic control unit to the correct parameters. The car will be like new." "How much will it cost?" Casey named a fair value for the specialized work, without inflating the price despite the exclusivity of the vehicle and the complexity of the problem. Baker nodded without hesitation. "Do the service and prepare a detailed report on everything you found. I want documentation, photos, evidence. I'll find out who did this and ensure they never work in the industry again." For the next 2 days, Casey dedicated herself entirely to repairing the Ferrari. She replaced the counterfeit sensor, meticulously checked each component of the electronic system, reprogrammed the control unit with the original factory parameters. She documented each step with photographs and precise notes, building a dossier that left no doubt about the deliberate nature of the problem. When Baker returned to pick up the vehicle, Casey conducted a road test with him in the passenger seat. The Ferrari responded with the mechanical perfection for which it was designed, accelerating smoothly and reaching high speeds without any hesitation or failure. "Impressive," commented the businessman as they returned to the garage. "You not only solved the problem, but did it with an efficiency I've never seen before, and without any unnecessary technical jargon to justify absurd prices." While they finalized the payment and paperwork, Baker observed the garage environment with renewed curiosity. The organized but unpretentious space, the modern but not ostentatious equipment, the small team working with focus and without fanfare. A business model so different from his own, but undeniably effective. "I have a proposal for you, Ms. Davis," he finally said. "You can call me Casey." "Right, Casey. As I said before, I'm the owner of Premium Motors in Chicago, a considerable operation focusing on high-standard vehicles. We serve a demanding clientele that values exclusivity and technical excellence." He made a calculated pause before continuing. "I'd like to open a branch here in Springfield, a center specialized in complex diagnostics and customized solutions, and I want you to be the technical director." The proposal caught Casey by surprise. It was an opportunity many newly graduated engineers would dream of receiving, a prestigious position, certainly high salary, association with a brand recognized in the luxury market. "I'm flattered, Mr. Baker, but the salary would be 3 times what you probably make here," he interrupted, interpreting her hesitation as a negotiation tactic. "Formal contract, profit sharing, budget to assemble your own team, and you would maintain complete technical autonomy." Casey smiled, realizing that Baker, despite his apparent change in attitude, still operated within the traditional logic of business where everything could be quantified and negotiated. "I sincerely appreciate the offer, but I need to decline." Baker's expression betrayed his surprise. He wasn't used to having proposals rejected, especially when they were so generous. "May I ask why? If it's a matter of values, we can negotiate." "It's not that," Casey replied calmly. "This garage isn't just a business for me. It's a legacy, a purpose. My father dedicated his life to helping ordinary people keep their vehicles running when they couldn't afford expensive services. I continue that work with the tools that engineering gave me, but the essence is the same." She looked around at the space she had transformed with so much effort before continuing. "Here I serve everyone from the rideshare driver who needs the car to survive to businessmen like you. All receive the same respect and dedication. I don't know if I could maintain that in an environment focused exclusively on luxury cars." Baker observed her with an expression that mixed respect and new understanding. "I understand, and I respect your decision, even if I don't completely agree with it." When saying goodbye, however, the businessman left a business card on the workbench. "If you ever change your mind, or if you need anything, my door is open. Professionals with your talent and integrity are rare in this market." Casey didn't imagine that the Ferrari episode would have such quick and significant developments. The morning after Baker's departure, her phone didn't stop ringing. Apparently, the businessman had shared the experience with friends from the same social circle, other businessmen and luxury car collectors who faced similar problems with their specialized garages. In less than a week, 2 Porsches, a Maserati, and a latest generation Range Rover had passed through the small garage in the outskirts of Springfield. With each new luxury vehicle that arrived, neighbors observed with a mixture of amazement and pride. Joe's girl was really making it big, but Casey didn't let the new clientele change her priorities. She kept prices accessible for old customers and continued dedicating the same care to a '95 Golf as to a Porsche 911. The difference was that now she could charge fair, but higher values from new customers who could afford it, which allowed for important investments in the garage. She hired 2 young people from the neighborhood as apprentices, providing them with the same opportunity her father had given her years ago. She set up a small laboratory to continue developing her diagnostic software, which now included specific modules for high-performance vehicles. And perhaps most importantly, she managed to hire a nurse to care for Joe full-time, relieving the burden on Lucy and ensuring comfort for her father in the advanced stages of his illness. On a Sunday morning, while having coffee with her mother on the house porch, observing the already intense movement at the garage even on a day of rest, Casey reflected on the path traveled since the days when she drew engines in the margins of school notebooks. Who would have thought? Right, Mum. Do you remember how you used to fight with me because of the grease on my nails? Lucy smiled, her eyes carrying the weight of wisdom gained through years and difficulties. I just wanted to protect you, honey. I knew how hard this world is, especially for a woman. I was afraid you would suffer. I know, Mom, and I did suffer, but I think it had to be this way. Each closed door made me create my own path. At that moment, a laptop open on the kitchen table emitted a notification sound. It was an email from Automotive Engineering magazine, one of the most respected publications in the sector. The subject of the message made Casey choke on her coffee. Invitation to lecture at the National Congress of Mechanical Engineering. The body of the email was even more surprising. The organization of the Congress, which would bring together the main names of the American automotive industry in Chicago the following month, invited Casey to give a lecture on innovation in advanced electronic diagnostics, focusing on the software she had developed and her unique approach to solving complex problems. "What is it, honey?" asked Lucy, noticing Casey's expression of amazement. "I think I've just been officially recognized by the engineering world, Mom," she replied, still assimilating the meaning of that invitation. In the weeks leading up to the Congress, Casey divided herself between preparations for the lecture and the increasingly intense work at the garage. She developed a presentation that, far from being too technical or inaccessible, focused on the importance of uniting theoretical and practical knowledge, the valuing of simple solutions for complex problems, and the need to make technology accessible for professionals of all levels. When the day finally arrived, she dressed with elegant simplicity, dark dress pants and a well-cut white shirt, without excesses or adornments. Joe, even debilitated, insisted on helping her choose the outfit, reminding her that you don't need frills when you have competence. The auditorium where she would give the lecture was packed. In the front row, familiar faces: Richard Baker, who had become an unexpected supporter; John from Serrano Dairy with his complete family; Tim from Auto Electric, wearing a suit for the first time in his life. Also present were university professors, including some who had doubted her abilities years ago. And in the center of the first row, a reserved chair with the name Joseph Davis. Her father had not been able to travel due to health conditions, but Casey had made a point of symbolizing his presence. When she climbed onto the stage and adjusted the microphone, she felt a moment of hesitation facing that audience, composed mainly of men in formal attire, many with expressions of barely disguised skepticism. She took a deep breath, remembered all the times she had faced hostile and prejudiced environments, and began her presentation with the firm voice that years of challenges had forged. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Davis. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I grew up in a garage in the outskirts of Springfield." In the following 2 hours, she led the audience through a journey that mixed technical rigor and personal narrative. She demonstrated in practice how her software worked, analyzing complex problems in automotive electronic systems in real time. She shared real cases she had solved when other specialists had failed, always with humility but without diminishing her own achievements. And, perhaps most impactful, she presented concrete data on how her diagnostic approach had saved millions for small business owners and workers who depended on their vehicles to survive. When she finished, the initial silence was broken by a wave of applause that grew until it became a standing ovation. Renowned engineers, auto industry executives, university professors, all recognizing not just the technical brilliance, but the courage and perseverance that had allowed a young woman from the outskirts, against all odds, to silently revolutionize an entire sector. In the question session, a specialized journalist raised the question that many certainly had in mind. "Ms. Davis, with the recognition you're receiving, Do you intend to expand your operation? Perhaps accept one of the many offers you must be receiving from large companies? Casey smiled before answering, thinking of her father, the simple garage where she grew up, and all the obstacles she had transformed into steps. My plans are to continue doing what I've always done, solving real problems for real people. The scale may change, the technology will certainly evolve, but the essence remains the same. I want to use what I know to open doors, not just for myself, but for other young people who, like me, have potential, but face barriers because of their origin, gender, or social condition. She paused before adding, and as for corporate offers, I appreciate the interest, but I prefer to maintain my independence. Davis Garage will continue to be a family business, albeit with increasingly broader horizons. At the end of the Congress, Casey returned to Springfield not only with proposals for commercial and academic partnerships, but with something much more valuable, the certainty that she had found her own path, one that didn't imitate existing models or bow to limiting expectations. In the weeks and months that followed, she implemented significant changes in the garage. She created a training program for young mechanics, with special focus on women interested in the area. She established a research and development laboratory where she continued improving her software, now with the collaboration of university students. And she initiated a distance consulting project that allowed garages in remote regions of the country to have access to advanced diagnostics without needing expensive equipment. On a quiet afternoon, while accompanying her father in the small but well-kept garden they had built at the back of the house, Casey reflected on the journey that had brought her there. Joe, sitting in his wheelchair under the shade of an apple tree, observed with silent pride the daughter who had exceeded all expectations. "You know, Dad," said Casey, "I still remember the day that science fair teacher doubted I had made the engine myself." Joe smiled, his tired eyes still bright with wisdom. "And now they all know what you can do, not because you shouted, not because you begged for attention, but because you simply showed your worth day after day. You always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Because I saw what was inside you, honey. The same thing you see inside engines, that potential that others don't see." That night, back at the garage to finalize a complex diagnosis on a delivery truck, Casey looked around and felt a wave of gratitude for the path traveled. Each challenge, each closed door, each look of doubt had been essential to forge not just the engineer she had become, but the person she had chosen to be. On the wall of the expanded garage, between technical certificates and formal recognitions, there was a simple frame with an old photograph, a 10-year-old girl, curly hair tied in an awkward ponytail, small hands reverently holding a wrench larger than her arms. Next to her, a middle-aged man with coveralls stained with grease and a smile of pure pride. That image, more than any diploma or award, represented the true essence of Davis Garage, a place where technical knowledge was important, but where passion, perseverance, and respect for ordinary people were the true engines of innovation.